Hilchis Nizkei Mamon Perek Revi. Hakenes Sein Ledir V'Noal B'Fneim B'Dela Sheyechel Lamed Baruch Mitzuya. So he did the shmira which was expected of him, and lepel was yotzes v'yizika. So he's potter. Why? Because he did what he was supposed to do, and the fact that a hezek happened is considered an oinus mitzidoi. Now the din is we have to just maybe agdoma that let's say a person did a shmira koroi, and then the behemoth goes out, and he knows the behemoth is out. So now he has a responsibility to go ahead and look for the behemoth and to make sure the behemoth is not mazik. There's the fact that he did a shmira koroi, but now there's a new matzav that this behemoth is outside of this shmira koroi, so it's an obligation for him to go find the behemoth. So the Pashas over here, the Marsha says in the beginning of Akenis, that the pshat is that when a behemoth goes out, you're not expected that the Balabai should know. If the Marshal Pertzua lists him, as we'll see by Hemshech, so then the Pashas there's a koil, so therefore we assume the Balabai knows about it. Masha'inkein, if it wasn't Pertzua list him, Stamazay, the behemoth went out, so then we assume the Balabai doesn't know about it, and therefore he's potter. So that's this first din, that Akoin is saying Ledir, and he was Noel B'fneim Koroi, and Lepel was Yotzis V'Yizika, so we assume he didn't know about it, and therefore he's potter. That's talking about if it was Kiroi. V'meini Yechel Elamed Baruch Mitzuya. Oy Shahoye Kostli Adir Ru'uyin, so he didn't do a proper Shmira, either because the Delis wasn't a proper Delis, or the walls weren't proper walls. So Mimele comes out, Harei Leinoal B'fneim Koroi. So here, V'im Yotzis V'Yizika Chayiv. If it goes out and his mazik is chayiv, va'afilu chotre v'yotzis. Even if it was chotre v'yotzis, and it was dug under the wall and it was yotzis, so it comes out that this oinus is not really as a result of this pshia. Before we learned that there's a musik tchilasi b'pshia v'seifa b'einus, l'mashal he took the behema l'reish agag, and that was a pshia, and then lepel the behema fell off, and that was an oinus. Jumped off, fell off, it was an oinus. So Memela, so over this, tchilasi b'pshia v'seifa b'einus, but the Einus came as a result of the Pshia. Over here, the Einus didn't come as a result of the Pshia because it was Chotra V'Yotzis. But nevertheless, since he was B'Shia B'Shmira, if he was B'Shmira, he's Chayiv. That's what this din is. Then the Ram adds, V'afilu Nifritza Mechitza B'Layla. Even if Nifritza Mechitza B'Layla, a Partzua listim, so in either way is Balatzein Chayiv. So what's the Chiddush over here? That Nifritza Mechitza B'Layla, a Partzua listim. So it's not so clear. What's the difference B'Layla or B'Yem? So the Maise is in Teis over there in Akenis, he talks about it, they says like this. During the day, a person is mechuyev to go look for it. A person is mechuyev to go look for it. And if it would be Pertzua listim, so the Pashtus it was Keil Yeshle during the day. So in other words, during the day it would have been Keil Yeshle, and since it's a Keil Yeshle, so we assume that he would have known about it. So therefore, even if he would have been Noel B'fneim Koroi, and it was Pertzua listim by Yoim, he would be Chayiv. Comes out like a chiddush, not so clear. The first din of Akenis Sein Ledir and of Yotzes V'Yizika, it's not talking about Pertzua listim by Yem. It's talking about Stamazeh. It was Yotzes V'Yizika, so we assume he doesn't know about it, and therefore he's chayiv. If it was Pertzua listim by Yom, so we assume he does know about it, and therefore he would be mechuyev to go look for it. If it would be Pertzua listim by Laila, Teisva says that that's the chiddush over there, that even though it's by Laila and he does know about it, but Lepel, since it's Balayla, he's not mechuyev to go look for it. He's not mechuyev to go look for it. So Balayla is not mechuyev to go look to it. When? If he would have made a Shmira Koroi. Masha'ingan, if he didn't make a Shmira Koroi and it was Pertzua listed Balayla, he is mechuyev to go look for it. And Al Der El Zeh, if it was Nifritz Balayla Me'eleha, if it was Nifritz Balayla Me'eleha, so Lepel also he's mechuyev for it. Because Lepel, he was a Tchilasi B'Pshia. That's this din. So let's read again the whole halacha. Hakenes Sein Ledir v'nafel b'fneim b'delish v'noal b'fneim b'delish yechel lamed baruch mitzuya, and lepel is v'yotzis v'yizika potter, and we're saying that it means it was yotzis b'yem me'elaha, so we assume he didn't know about it, and therefore he's potter. Masha'inkin, if it would have been pertzua listim b'yem, so then he would have been chayv. Now, in other words, if there would have been a chance for him to go look for it, because Pertzua listim, so Memela, he knows that it's out of the deer, so he's not going to look for it. Now, so then is Harei Leinoal B'fneim Koroi, and therefore, Vim Yotzes V'Yizika Chayiv, and V'afilu Chotre V'Yotzes, even if it was Chotre V'Yotzes, so it was Mamash an Oinus, and it wasn't an Oinus as a result of Pshia, but since he wasn't Shema Koroi, he's Chayiv. Then, Vafilu Nifritza Mechitza Balayla, even if the mechitza was nifritza balayla, and Mamela, he wasn't really able to look for it. A pertsua listim. So either way, balatzein chayev, because he was shemer shalikaroi. Masha'enken, if it would have been shemer yekaroi, and then it would have been nifritza mechitza balayla, even if he would have known about it. Or it was pertsua listim, so the pashtus he knew about it. But since it's balayla, so then he's potter. So again, when a person was shemer karoi, then if it was nifritza balayla, a pertsua listim, so also balayla. So then, if he, even though he knows about it, he's potter. Mashenkin bayem, if it was if it was nifritza bayem and he knows about it, or if it was pertsua listim and bepashtus he knows about it, so then even if he was shema karoi, he's also chayav. Now hoysa mechitza bria, v'nifritza balayla, eshe pertsua listim v'yosef v'zika potter. That's his din. If it was a mechitza bria and it was nifritza balayla, even if he knows about it. Eshe Partsua listim and bepashtus he knows about it, and lepel v'yotzes v'zika, so he's potter and he's not mechuyev to go look for it. Now hoitziua listim v'zika. So now in the case where Partsua listim, the listim also potter, because even though the listim were geirim, that it should be mazik, but nevertheless they're potter. However, hoitziua listim, if the listim actually took it out, the hizika and lepel was mazik, so then the listim they were kain v'kinyanik zela, and those kinyanim are also mechayev in chiyuv v'shmira. So therefore, listam chayavim. So let's just say it one more time. The halacha. A person is kenas sein ledir, and if it was a shmira koroi, so then the lepel, the behemoth came out in an ephon of a roch sheni mesuya, he's potter, and we don't expect him to know about it. If we know that he knows about it, then he is responsible. If it was pertsua listam bayem, he would also be responsible because we would assume that he knows about it. If it was pertsua listam balayla and he knows about it, or if it was lepel, it was nifritza balayla, and he also knows about it, but since he was made a shmira koroi, he's potter. What happens if he made a shmira sheina koroi? If he made a shmira sheina koroi, he's always responsible. He's always responsible, even if it came out ba'inus, even if it's pertsua listim or pertsua balayla. Since lepel, he knew, since he did a shmira which was eina koroi, so therefore he's always chayiv. That's why he's always chayiv. That's this din. Now, whether the listim are chayiv or not, so we say if pertsua listim, the listim are potter. He's potter, and the listim are potter. Mashayin if hitziyu listim, so since they were hitziyu, they became responsible al kinyonig neva. Halacha beis haperetz geder lefnei behemes chavere v'yotzes v'zika is im hoysa geder chazuk ubari is chayiv, which is pashas l'chura stira to what you just learned before. We just learned before that pertsua listim, so he's potter, and the Balat Sein is also potter. Everyone's potter. Masha'egin only by Hitzior listim is chayiv. And over here we're learning that Apel is gedel if nei bem is chaveri. He is chayiv. If Lepel was a kesel body, he is chayiv. So it's brought down that the difference is if they had what was the purpose of being pirates? It was in the case of Pertsua listim. The listim went into Ganva, and Memela they weren't being pirates in order for the behem to go out. They were being going into Ganva, and Lepel as a result of that the behem left. So then we say that the listim are potter unless it was Hitziur listim. Mashenka over here was talking about that was his intent. Paid is gedel if neibam is chaveri. So then the din is it was a geder chazuk ubari is chayiv. Hoya kesel ruah. So then potter medini adam chayiv medini shemayim. So obviously if it was kesel ruah, so the baal behem is chayiv. But let's say the baal behem doesn't have any money. If he doesn't have any money, so so the question is could the nizik go to the Ghana for month from him the money? So we say he can't man b'dini yadam, but he could man b'dini shemayim. V'chein ha'noisen samamovis lefnei behemes chaveri is potter b'dini yadam v'chay b'dini shemayim. So just like ha'peretz geder lefnei behemes chaveri, if it was a koisel ru'ah, so then he's potter b'dini yadam v'chay b'dini shemayim. So there's another din that ha'noisen samamovis lefnei behemes chaveri and lepel the behema ate the samamovis and died, so he's potter b'dini yadam v'chay b'dini shemayim. Halacha gimel. Hamaymed behemes chaveri al gabi komas chaveri. So the din is hamaymed chayav l'shalom mashehizik. The maimed, the person that took this behema and he brought it al gabi komas chaveri and the behema ate, so the maimed is chayav l'shalom mashehizik. V'cheinim hikisha at sheholcha l'komas chaveri v'hizika zeh shehikisha chayav. Now there's a deal. What kind of din is this? Is this pshat that he become? No, there's a din of shein v'regel. A person that owns a behema and the behema is mazik b'shein, so he's chayiv because his behema was mazik b'shein. Now over here he took someone else's behema and that behema was mazik b'shein. So do we say that like you become like the bala behema legabe chiyuv shein, but be'emes it's a shein dikachiyuv. It's a shein dikachiyuv, but you become the bala behema because you're the one that took the behema. Other than that, it's not a shein dikachiyuv. Shein dikachiyuv is only when you're the bala behema. Over here, you're not the bala behema. It's a nuchiyuv because you are maimed behema al kamas chaverin. Nafkamina would be, are you chayiv b'rshus harabim? The shein is potter b'rshus harabim. Shein is only chayiv b'rshus hanizik. So the tzir over here is al gabi kamas chaverin is b'rshus hanizik. What would be if it would be if it wouldn't be a b'rshus hanizik? Would it be b'rshus harabim? So if it's a din maimed is a psanu din, so then it's like a din of even b'rshus harabim because it's like a adam amazik. Mashengen, if it's a gather of shein that you become the baal of ahim or the gabi shein, so then it would be part of b'rshus harabim, which Taisus discussed it in the beginning of Hakenos. Halacha dalet. Hamoiser behemte l'shem rechinam ele nesisachar ele secher ele sheil. So the din is nichnusu tachas habaylam. The shemer becomes bimkeim habaylam. V'himi zikran, if the behema was mazik, chayiv hashemer. And the pashtus says that the balabais is potter. It's just like if you sell an item. So now that new owner is the one that's chayiv, and the original balabais is obviously potter. So al derech zeh, if you give it over to a shemer, so it's nichnusu tachas habaylam. The shemer becomes bimkeim the baylam. And now the shemer is the chayiv and the bailam are potter. But medvar mamurim that the shemer is chayiv is manshul shemru klal. Avalim shemru shmira ula karoi and v'yotzes v'zika. So the din is hashemerim turim. Now over here it says v'bailam chayavim. But b'pashtus if he gave it over to the shemer and he was shemer shmira karoi, so why should the bailam be chayavim? So they take out this girsa, they take out the word v'bailam chayavim, they write it behemshach. At this point in time, a person gave it over to the shemer gave it, who did a shmir karoi, b'pashtus, the shemer mapturim, and the bailam are also potter. Now, I feel he misses Adam. Shamru shmira pchusa, if the shemer did a shmira pchusa, so it depends. Im shemer chinam who potter, because a shemer chinam is only expected to do a shmira pchusa. And over here you add the words, what you said before, v'abailam chayavim, because the bailam are mechoyiv in the shmira mu'ula. So in Mela, and the shemer is only mechuyev in the shmira pchusa. So if the shemer did a shmira pchusa and lepel a hezek happened because there was no shmira mu'ula, so therefore the shemer chinam was potter and the bailam chayav. However, if shemer socher is seicher sheilu, so then he's chayav, then they are chayav. So it comes out that when a person is mosel the shemer and he did a shmira pchusa, so then the bailam are mechuyev in the shmira mu'ula. Masha'inken, if lepel it was a shema sachar, so he's mechuyev in the shmira mu'ula, so then the bailam are completely potter. The bailam are completely potter. Now the ma'aseh is that there's a dion. Comes out the pastures from here that the bailam are mechuyev in the shmira mu'ula, and the shemer, depending if it's a shemechinam is only a shmira pchusa, and the shema sachar mechuyev in a shmira mu'ula. Ma'aseh that we'll learn behemshah that only by a tam is he mechuyev in the shmira mu'ula, and not by a mu'at, so the chura will come out, so the bailam are also not mechuyev by a regular behema, a shmira mu'ula. He's also only mechuyev a shmira pchusa. So therefore the diyan is whether this is only talking about a tam. I know when you read the Rambam itself, the Rambam is talking about sama behema. The Peil Shulchan Aruch, the Sma brings that this whole din has only been a giyat tam. I'll call upon halacha hinicha bachama. There's another diyan over here. Whereas we're saying like this, Hashemer is nichnasu tachas habaylam, and lepel, the nizek could only go to the shemer, and he can't go to the bailam. Now over here you have a ma'aseh with a shemer chinom. The shemer is chinom is mechuyev only in a shmira pchusa, and he's not mechuyev in a shmira mu'ula. So lepel, if he did a shmira pchusa, so then if he did a shmira pchusa and lepel there was a hazik, the bailam achayav. And if he didn't do a shmira pchusa, then the shemer is potter. So lepel comes out that the bailam are really still responsible for it. The bailam are still responsible for this behema, but if the shemer does the shmira pchusa, if the shemer, and therefore if he only did a shmira pchusa, so therefore the bailam will be chayiv. Question is, what happens, l'mashal, if the shemer didn't do a shmira pchusa? He didn't do a shmira pchusa. So be'amas the shemer is chayiv. The shemer is chayiv. The shemechinam is chayiv. But lepel, the shemechinam doesn't have any money. So could you go to the bailam and ask for him the money? So l'chura, when we say a shemer is nichnas utachas habaylam, l'chura the pshat is he became the bailam. You can't go to the bailam anymore. You could only go to the shemer. So bishlam, when you take with a shemer which completely took over the bailam, so you could go to the shemer, you can't go to the bailam. But over here, the Bailam are still responsible for the Shmira Mu'ula. The Shemer is only responsible for the Shmira Pchusa. Now, Lepel, if the Shemer didn't do the Shmira Pchusa, so are you going to say, Legabi, the Shmira Pchusa, the Shemer completely took over, and Memela, the Bailam aren't at all Mechuyev? Or we say, no, since Lepel, ultimately, the Bailam are still Mechuyev for the Shmira Mu'ula, so Ein Achinami, if the Shemer didn't do the Shmira Pchusa, the Shemer is responsible, but Lepel, if the Shemer doesn't have the money, L'chura, there's a mokum to say that you have to go to the Bailam anyways, because Lepel, the Bailam, he didn't completely take over the Bailam. It's yesh mokim lodun. Halacha he nicha bechama. He left the behema bechama va'afilu chotra v'yatzis v'yizika, which normally that would be considered an oinus. Is zeh shehinicha afilu chotra v'yizika is chayiv zeh shehinicha sham. The person that left it bechama is chayiv. Why? Shekiva shehinicha bechama idacharehi mitztaeres ubirachas. So it's normal that the behema is be mitztaer from the sun. And if we're trying to run away from it, so therefore, normally you don't expect a chatra. Chatra is an unusual thing. But in a case where the behemoth finds itself bechama, so to be chatra is normal. Halacha vav. Masar behemti lecheres sheite v'kotten. Is afal pi shehoya asher kosher, so l'chur you'll say that it's lepel, it's shamur, so the din is habaylam chayavim, shederech asher ki yetzebei lahatir hakesher, v'lotzis lahazik, and therefore, if the only person that's there that's responsible for the share is the cheresh sheita v'kotten, and it's normal for the share to untie itself, so therefore basically you're being irresponsible. You're not having a responsible shmira by giving it over, even a tied share, to a cheresh sheita v'kotten. Then the Ram continues, afilu shamru shmira mu'ula v'chotra v'yatzis v'hizika hambaylim chayov. Now the question is, what does shamru shmira mu'ula mean? Who is the shamru shmira mu'ula? So the Gedei Achreinim learn pshat that Shamru Shmir Mu'ula means that after you gave it over to the Cheresh Sheita V'Kotten, so then the Bailam went ahead and was Shamru Shmir Mu'ula, and from deswegen Lepela was since the Cheresh was still there involved, so therefore it's still considered a certain Pshia because Lepel the Cheresh is involved. When Al Derech HaPoshet, you could learn Poshet when you touch the words. I feel the Shamru Shmir Mu'ula means the Cheresh Sheita V'Kotten was Shamru Shmir Mu'ula. Whereas Masi Behemti L'cheresh sheita v'kotten, and Lepel the behemoth was mazik, so then he's chayiv because Lepel it's darkei to untie itself, and therefore there was no shmira. Now I feel a shemru shmira mula, even if Lepel the cheresh sheita v'kotten was shema this, you were moisa a behemoth l'cheresh sheita v'kotten, and Bepel mamish the cheresh sheita v'kotten was shemru shmira mula, and Lepel is chotra v'yatzis v'yizika. Lepel this behemoth be'efen shel enes was chatra v'yatzis v'zika despite the shmira mu'ula that it had. Nevertheless, a bailam chayam, because since it gave it over to a cheresh sheita v'kotten, so that's called a tchilasi v'pshir, just like we learned before, that if you have, let's say, not a good wall, and then lepela was chatra v'zika yechayim, so that is over here, when you give it over to a cheresh sheita v'kotten, even though lepel, an oinus occurred, but the whole musig of having it under the shmira of a cheresh sheita v'kotten is a pshir. So therefore, I feel a chatra v'yatzav yizik is a bayim chayav. Halacha zayin, Mosar shemer lechamisha, uposha be'echad mem, and lepel v'yatzav yizik. One of them was pishea, and it wasn't involved, and then the behemoth went out and was mazik. So im einem mishtamer el b'chameshtam, you need all five to watch this behemoth. Is there sheposha b'shmirasi chayiv? The person that was pishea originally, b'shmirasi he's chayiv, because lepel you need all five, and once he leaves, so it doesn't have this proper shmira. So therefore, his leaving was what caused the original fact that it was Pesher B'Shmirase. Mainly the other four aren't responsible. However, the Mishtamer B'Sharan, in other words, each one could have been Shemerit. You didn't need all five to be Shemerit. So then, Afeilu and Sharim are also Chayav. In other words, because each one is responsible. In other words, each one is a Shemer, and each one could be Shemer on his own. So therefore, each one is responsible. So therefore, they have to share. If there was a chiv tashlumin because of the heder hashmira, so they all have to share. If they need all five, so by one person leaving, so obviously you can't have the proper shmira anymore. So the other four are potter. The first one that was pisheh, he's the one that's chayiv. Masha'enkin, if all of them could be shemer, so therefore each one is chayiv. So memela, even though the other ones could have also been shemer, but lepel, each person has his responsibility on the shmira. That was his chiyuv shmira. So therefore, if something happens, each one of the five are responsible. Halacha ches. Shali b'cheskas tam. A person goes ahead and borrows an animal, assuming b'pashus there was a tam, and lepel was nimtzas mu'at. Is im yoda hashel shehu nakhin, he knew there was, he assumed there was a tam, but he knew that it was already negech. It wasn't like it happened already. Is the din is habaylim mishal mechotzi nezik. Half of the nezik the baylim have to pay, because kol makim shu helech harishem bol of olav. So here the Rambam is bavarning that there's a svara to say that when there's a shini or a shus, like we'll learn b'amshech, when you have an animal which is considered a muad, and then the shus changes. So let's say it became a muad b'shus hashel, we'll learn, and then the shale gives it back to the baylim. So memela it becomes uismuad, because it's the shini or shus is chazer l'tamusei. So l'chur over here also there's a svara that since lepel the baylim gave it to the shale, so by giving it to the shale, so it loses the shemuad. So on that he's saying no. Shekol makim shuhelech harishem ba'ol of olav, and therefore it didn't lose its shemuad. It's still a muad. And since as a muad, so he has to pay a nezik shalim, and he thought it was a tam. So the chotzi nezik, the owner has to pay. That's nachamah. Is a baylim mishal mechotzi nezik? Why shekol makim shuhelech harishem ba'ol of olav, and therefore he's a muad. So you have to pay a nezik shalim. So half of the nezik the baylim pays. V'hashel mishal mechotzi nezik. Shafilo hayatam, the chatzi nezik hayimishal. So a chatzi nezik, anyways, he has to pay. In other words, he thought it was a tam, and he knew it was a nakhan. So in Melis, he has to pay a chatzi nezik. Shari yodeshu nakhan. That's talking about if it was yodeshu nakhan. However, in yodeshu nakhan is ein hashel chayav klum v'abayil mishal nezik shalom is nachmo. Person borrows a behemoth. So if he assumes the behemoth is a regular behemoth, is not a negech at all, and then the behemoth goes ahead, and in reality it was a muad, and it was a nakhan, so therefore the bailim have to pay the whole thing. If the person borrowed the behemoth thinking that it was a tam, but knowing that it was negeach, so then the borrower, the shale, is mechuyev for half of it, and the original bailim is mechuyev for the other half, of the other half. That's this dip. Halacha tes. Shaloi kshehu tam, v'huad bebeis hashel, and then v'chazir lebalov. It became a muad bebeis hashel, and then he was mavzer it. So the din is chazel tamuse, it loses its shemut. Why? Because hail the nishtanis reshusei botla hado. Once it was nishtanis reshusei, the hado is bottled, the muad shafted bottled. Bailim is mishal mechotzi nazik. So if the bailim are, if it was mazik bebeis bailim, so it's mishal mechotzi nazik. And v'ashel potter, the shale is potter shari echziri. So even though it became a muad bebeis hashel, so maybe it will be a svara maybe that the shale somehow is not responsible for what happens later. So the answer is no. The shale, once the shale gives it back, it loses its shamuad, it's a tam, and memela, so there's only a din chotzi nezik, and that din chotzi nezik is on the original bailam, and not on the shale. Halacha yud, shemer shekibul ol of shmiras gufa behemah bulvad, avolei shmiras nizokeh, and v'hizika is potter melishal. So even though normally when a person is shale, so in this deal is the pashtus advarim is that he's responsible for the zekas, nichnasu tachas habaylim, but you could stipulate, you could make a clear stipulation that lepel you're not chayav for any damages that this behemoth will do. Zekas patim l'shalom, and habaylim are chayavim. Now kibul shmiras nezokeh v'hizika, if he was mekabel shmiras nezokeh, but he wasn't mekabel the dinim of the shemer, just shmiras nezokeh is chayav hashemer, and v'huska pater. So in other words, it's not normally the din is when a person is, let's say, a shayl, so he's responsible for the behemoth, he's responsible also for the hezekas. A shamer is responsible for the behemoth, he's responsible for the hezekas the behemoth does. But you could stipulate a separate chiyuv. You could be mechayiv yourself in becoming a shamer and watching the behemoth not to be mazik. But on the other end, if the behemoth is huzak, that's not your shmira. Halacha yudalef. Mosar hashemer l'shemer acher. Someone gave it to a shemer, and then the shemer gives it over to another shemer. So the din is hashemer harishin chayiv l'shalom nezik shalom. So here the shemer rishin can't say, listen, the shemer sheni is responsible. Shahashemer shemosar l'shemer chayiv. A person, a shemer that was mosar l'shemer chayiv, b'hariyanizik emel loma l'shamarta atzu ba'atzmacha umasarta l'acher. Why did you give it over to someone else? Shalom li'ata. That's his din. The din is a shemer shemasol l'shemer. So the nizik could say to the original shemer, "How you talking? You gave it to the second shemer. Maybe you should pay to me." And the shaila is l'chura. What's the avonas hadorim? L'chura, just like a person can give it over to a shamer, and the nizik can't go to the original owner and say, why did you give it to a shamer? Why didn't you watch it yourself? He's not mechuyev to watch it himself. He has a right to give it over to a shamer. Just like he has a right to sell it, and then you're going to say, why did you sell it? I sold it. I'm allowed to sell it. So I'm allowed to give it over to a shamer. Over here you're saying that if the shamer gives it over to a shamer, so the nizik is saying to the shamer rishon, why did you give it over to the shamer sheni? And memela, you should be responsible for their zekas. What's the shamer rishon chayiv to the nizik? He's not. He has psachiv to be shamer. It was a chiv between him and the original owner, and now he's giving it over to another shamer. It's hard to understand. So the Maisa is, it's brought down that the pshat is azay. Since Lepel, the shamer rishon, Klapi the Bailam had no right to give it over to the shamer sheni. Whereas be'emes, it's not the nizik has a psataina to the shamer rishon. The nizik has a time to the shamer rishon because the shamer rishon has a chi of Klapi the Bailam. Whereas the Klapi the Bailam, the shamer rishon has no right to give it over to the second shamer. Shemer shemasel shemer is chayiv. So maybe he didn't really have a right to give it over to the shemer sheni. Since he didn't have a right to give it over to the shemer sheni, so he still remains a shemer. Klape the bailam rishenim, he still remains a shemer. Since he remains a shemer, klape the bailam rishenim, he remains also a shemer legabe the nizik. That's the avanas of the one. You should have been watching ba'atzmucha klape the shemer rish, not klape the nizik. And therefore, since you should have been watching the behema klape the original bailam, so memela, so remains also the chi of klape the nizik. Now mosra shemer lebnei leben beisei lemesadeh. So in other words, when a person gives it over to a shamer, it's understood like this. Klapi, the bailam rishenim, the bailam rishenim ties to the shamer. Why don't you give it over to someone else to watch? In other words, the shamer shmasel, the shamer is chayev. The reason is because I gave it over to you. I didn't want to give it over to someone else. Mashenkin, if you give it to someone and bepastos, he's going to give it to his son. He's going to give it to someone who lives in his house. He'll give it to someone that works with him. In other words, that's obvious. Part of when you're giving over the shmira. So Mela, the Shemer Rishon has no taina. If the Shemer Rishon has no taina, so then the Nizik also has no taina. That's this then. Mosra Shemer lebnei ben beisei mesadeh. So then is nichnas utachas Hashemer, and then the Chayavim, they are chayev towards the Nizik. They're chayev towards the Nizik, and therefore the Nizik has no tainas to the Shemer Rishon. Halacha Yud Beis. Kol Shemer shnes chayev l'shalom ve'ein lei, and v'hoya hamazik tam. So then hariya nizik mishtalim and abehema sheizika. Normally, the nizik only takes from the behema. The nizik only takes from the behema. Over here, we're dealing with a shemer. A shemer l'chura the behema is not his. So normally, over there by a time, the nizik goes to the shemer. He says, "Listen, the behema is not yours, and if I'm going to take from the behema, you're going to have to go and pay back the original bailam. So I'm taking from you." That's the way it normally is. That the nizik takes from the shemer itself. Medvar mamurim, if the shamer has money, so he says, instead of taking from the behema, and then the behema, so you're going to have to pay the bailam, you pay me. Mashahinkan of lepel, the shamer has no money, so then he could go to the behema itself. Nachamol kol shamer shnes chayev l'shalom ve'elei v'oya mazik tam shu mishalom chatzidezik megufei. So then hariyan nizik mishtalim and abehema sheizika, because lepel he has a din he should take from the shamer, from the behema. And be sure the may mashagava nizik chayv ala shema lebalabei. Halacha Yud Gimel. Kol behema sheizika peiros mechubarim. Ish misharim ma sheizika b'shishim. So if you have peiros which are attached to the ground, and now the behema goes and eats those peiros, so you don't really assess how much the peiros are worth. You assess how much the peiros are worth agav the ground. In other words, how much would this piece of karka be worth with the peiros? And how much would this piece of karka be worth without the peiros? And also, you don't assess how much this particular piece of karka with these peiros are, but rather you assess 60 times as much as the peiros that were eaten. So in other words, the peiros ate a base saw, as we'll soon see. He ate a base saw of peiros. So you assess how much would 60 saw that are full of peiros be worth, and how much are 60 saw that are full of peiros worth if one saw is missing. So obviously it's much less. In other words, this is Latevas Hamazik. This is Latevas Hamazik. Kol behema sheizika peiros mechubarim misharin ma sheizika b'shishim u'mishalim zeh shenis chayev l'shalim bein habaylim bein hashem, whether it's the baylim or the shem. Ketzad harei she'ochle beiso. A behema went ahead and ate a beiso of karka. So the din is shaman, shishim beisah, beisa soda, kama hoyeshava. How much are 60 saw full of payers worth? The kama hushava ata achash nifsad be'a beisah, and how much are these 60 saw worth after one saw of the payers are missing? Umishalam ashar, and he pays that difference. V'cheina machlekav, eireva, afilu klach echad, it ate one stalk. Is shaman eisa b'shishim, you mishar, how much would there be a piece of karka that have 60 stalks on it, and how much would that piece of karka be worth if one stalk is missing? Which obviously, the mere fact that you're assessing an agav karka, that's in itself a kula for the mazik. And now it's a much bigger kula that you assess it, how much it's worth agav the karka in regards to 60 times as much. So obviously, what comes off is much less than what if you would be only dealing with one piece of karka. Halacha Yudalet, Ochla Peiros Gemurim She'ein Tzrichim Lekarka. This is talking about eating peiros which are in the middle of growing. Masha'enken Ochla Peiros Gemurim She'ein Tzrichim Lekarka. So then, Mishalim Dmei Peiros Gemurim B'Shavyeim. Imsoa Dmei So, you pay the value of the peiros. You pay Imsoa Dmei So, Imsosayim Dmei Sosayim. Now, Hareisha Ochla Peiros Dekel Echad. He ate the fruit of one dekel of one palm tree. V'chein Aleket Peiros Dekel Chaveri V'Ochel. Someone himself was Leiket Peres de Klaveda. It was an Adam Amazik. Izim Hoya Dekel Roimi Ukiyotzebei. She'ena Tmorim Shula Yafis. It was a regular palm tree, not a special palm tree. So then there's also Mishar Nesa B'Shishim. You take a look at 60 palm trees, and if you're selling 60 palm trees, and one of the palm trees no longer have the dates, how much are they worth? Mishar Nesa B'Shishim Agav Karka. That's if we're talking about what's called a dekel reimi, which is a regular dekel. However, when dekel parsu kiyesebehu, we're talking about a special Persian palm tree. Shat morim shule yofis beyeser. So then you're not misharin hadekel b'fnei atzmei. So you're not misharin this dekel agav shishim. You're misharin agav the dekel. You're not misharin the tmorim itself. You're misharin agav the dekel, but not agav shishim dekel. Misharin hadekel b'fnei atzmei. Kamo yeshav v'kamo yeshav ata. And according to that, that's how you pay.